Hey everybody, welcome back to Video Game SO. Today we're on a long-running series, the Unported Playlist, where I take a look at my favorite unported arcade games of all time, and today we got a special treat for you. One of Namco's weirdest games I think they've ever made. This is Cobra the Arcade, and it's basically what happens if you take the Time Crisis formula, put it in another light gun game, and just absolutely throw everything in the kitchen sink weird at the entire title. Now, this is based on a comic book as well as a manga and animated TV show, so a lot of what's going on in Cobra here I'm not sure of, but honestly I know weird when I see it. I know a good light gun game when I see it, and this has both going in spades. Before you get too far involved, do me a huge favor down below, hit like and subscribe and ring that notification bell, definitely helps us out. And if you feel so inclined to want to support the channel, I got a Patreon link down below as well. But Cobra the Arcade has absolutely everything I want out of a video game. It's a light gun arcade game, and you know I love that genre. It is filled with weird jank, and that is the flavor I desire, and it just is over-the-top action from start to finish. Now, before anyone leaves a comment down below, be aware that emulation of Cobra the Arcade is not final. This is running on a PlayStation 2 arcade board, and via emulation, you're not going to get 60 frames per second no matter what you throw at it system spec-wise. I've got an i9 and a 4080 Ti, and I cannot get this thing to run full speed because the emulation isn't there yet. So what I've done is retime this by hand in DaVinci Resolve to give you the motion cadence of what you would expect, but I would say I was hovering around 45 frames per second versus 60, but the internal physics and speed of this game and engine are tied to the frame rate, so there is a little bit of slowness if you're actually playing it. Doesn't avoid you from having a good time, but it does mean that you're not going to play this at 60 frames per second as of the recording of this video. But short of that, Cobra the Arcade is just absolute insanity personified. This is Time Crisis if Time Crisis did methamphetamines down in Florida. It is just such a wild, over-the-top, action-packed, energetic game that has so many weird different things to show you at every single turn. And because it was developed by some of the same people that worked on the Time Crisis franchise, you know the gameplay is absolutely stellar, and obviously we already have that duck mechanic to reload just like you would in a Time Crisis game. But interestingly, this also has a lock-on feature. If you hold the trigger down and drag the cursor with the light gun over your enemies, you have a lock-on shot that will destroy everyone at once. And I am playing this with Gun for IR via the Play emulator, which supports some PlayStation 2 arcade games. And as we get into the next cutscene here, one of my favorite things about this title is just the cutscenes are absolutely hilarious, and I love that Cobra here has animation on his mouth, but the other character talking has absolutely none whatsoever. There's a lot of jank surrounding this game, and it's the best type, and you know that is something I love in my arcade games. And the story on offer here is absolutely fun. It kind of feels like a James Bond movie come to life, except in the future with all sorts of wild things going on. And every single level in this game is just stellar from start to finish. There's so many set pieces, there's so much action, there's so many explosions and things flying all around the screen. You're going to be looking at something and shooting something the entire time you play this game. This is just one of those absolute arcade classics that I feel like most people have never played before, because this thing was a success in Japan, and if you go to Japanese arcade, odds are you'll probably see one somewhere, but in the US I've seen this cabinet all of once. It was at a GameWorks that imported Japanese cabinets. I played it from start to finish, fell in love with it, and was hoping it would get some sort of home console port, but obviously you're watching Unported Playlist, so you know that is not true. And as we go through this, what I assume to be Casino Hotel Lobby here, I love that you can destroy that platform and it ends up crashing into the enemies below. You could totally have just missed that thing completely, shot the enemies, and you'd have to have a bigger gunfight there. The amount of creativity and just the way you can play this game is spectacular, and you see here with that hologram, it definitely has a personality as well. It's a little bit saucy, it's a little bit tongue-in-cheek, and that works with the tone and the context of the game. It's basically like a slightly more mature Time Crisis for people that would have been fans of Cobra the series, and even if you have no idea what Cobra is, like me for the most part, you're still going to have an absolute fun time with this game. And one of my favorite parts is the absolute over-the-top amazing voice acting and the cutscenes you get to tell you the story. So go ahead and listen for 45 seconds and I'll be back to show you a lot more janky weirdness.
Crystal Boy. Cobraよ、さすがだな。しかしこのまま逃げられると思うなよ。死ね。逃げられはせんぞ。アクション。
Just amazing music, amazing cutscenes, amazing voice acting through and through. And if you notice that some of the sound there on the gunshots was off, I had to retime the footage again, but I had to bring the music back in from the source because the music will run at full speed even if the game's dropping 10-15 frames per second and slowing down. So when I retime it, the audio gets sped up on the musical soundtrack, so a little bit of trickery in the background there that I'm just telling you guys about. But as we get up here and we finally finish the boss fight, remember that cigar that we threw out of our mouth and it had a 10-minute countdown timer? Well, that is going to become very important in this cutscene. And I love how this game kind of sets up the story. You see something happen and then 10-15 minutes later, it's going to become important. As Cigar's timer finally counted down, perfect timing, the casino explodes, we can move on to the next area. And when I say this game is hilarious, I mean it. Dude's hair here feathered up like he is in the late 70s, early 80s, going to see a hair metal band play at his local bar. We have two women here in bikinis that know karate that are just going to try to absolutely kick your head off in a death by snoo snoo manner. Anything you can possibly imagine, Cobra the Arcade can and will do. It is just one of those games that's a pure joy to play because it's just a pure straight up spectacle from start to finish. It's weird, it's quirky, it's fun, and it has those amazing Time Crisis style light gun mechanics that everyone absolutely loves. And I like that she glows there as she does her spin kick, and of course, because this is the theme of the game, there are definitely jiggle physics installed on all of the models that would require them. So if that's your thing, it is here, and it is here in a ample amount. Pun very much intended. But again, Cobra the Arcade is just that classic old school arcade light gun game we don't see very often anymore. And I am kind of surprised that this never got ported home, even if it was a later release in the PlayStation 2 arcade library. This is the type of thing that would have been great in a box with a GunCon 2, or even revamped and ported to PlayStation 3 on the move, because Time Crisis 2, Time Crisis 3, and Crisis Zone all saw upgrades when they were ported home to PlayStation 2. I would have loved to have seen the same thing happen with Cobra the Arcade and a PlayStation 3 port, but I'm sure with some of the licensing on the properties, maybe it just was for arcade. But our two women here have been exploded and electrocuted to death, so we can move on. And what comes next? Technically, a gigantic single-eyed lava monster. There's something about Cobra Arcade that reminds me a lot of Lupin III, the shooting on Naomi, and just Lupin III in general, as far as a franchise is concerned. It's weird, it's wild, it can do anything it wants to, and you have an absolute blast watching what's coming next. And a lava monster in Cobra the Arcade just makes perfect sense contextually. You never question anything you see in this game, because you realize right off the top, everything and anything is going to happen, and you were just along for the ride. And that is why I love arcade games and talk about them so much on the channel. I grew up in arcades, and I love the concise 45 minutes to an hour that this game gives you. You're in, you're out, you have a good time, and you move on. And don't get me wrong, I play modern games as well as retro console games, but there's something about the arcade that always brings me back and just makes me want to play new stuff. And I even love that this game kind of harkens back to the old school era where you'd have full motion video and sprites or some polygons over top a video playing, because everything you're seeing on the screen that's not something I am shooting at is a full motion video, and it is a fun throwback and callback to what we used to play, and it works so well in context here. But I'm going to give you one more cutscene to get another taste of the music and the absolute insane story and voice acting in this game, and I'll come back and tell you a little bit more about how you can play Cobra the Arcade today.
この野郎やってくれるじゃねえか。俺を殺すことはできないそうなんだ。この3位相反射衛星はいかなるエネルギーをも跳ね返す。キャーサリー。
That cutscene is just Cobra the Arcade in a nutshell. It is 11 out of 10 over the top, and you love it for that. And we have our plant tentacle monster here that we have to destroy. You'll see that you don't get to use lock-on for some of the boss fights. It will sometimes inhibit you from actually playing it the way that you think you might want to. But honestly, Cobra the Arcade is just a special game. This is the type of game where the developers just did whatever they wanted to based on a property that did the exact same thing. And when you marry it together with Time Crisis mechanics and a lot of the time Time Crisis engine, you just have a recipe for an absolute 10 out of 10 hit. And it's a real bummer that this didn't make it bigger in the US, because if you know of any places where there is a Cobra the Arcade cabinet in the States, do leave me a comment down below. I do know that this is still in Japan, but again, I haven't seen an arcade cabinet for this in a very long time, and I think I might actually grab an arcade board for this and try to set it up at home, because I do want the full experience. Because this game absolutely feels like it should have gotten a home console port, and unfortunately it is still locked to the arcades. So you can play this on the Play emulator, but again, no matter how many system resources you throw at it, the emulation is just not complete, so it's never going to run full speed. But make sure you use the Vulkan API, not OpenGL, or else you're going to get a lot of graphical corruption. But other than that, it is playable. It slows down every once in a while, but you can definitely enjoy it, play it, and give it a shot. The only wrong way to play Cobra the Arcade is not to play it whatsoever. It is insanely weird, and I love it, and I'm definitely going to be buying a board. I'll see you guys next time. Bye-bye.